So today we have Sydney Collin and Maria Allen speaking to us. We're so happy. Sydney Collin is the inventor of NextStride and is the co-founder and CEO of Deoro Devices. Deoro Devices' mission is to develop products to improve mobility, independence, and quality of life. NextStride does just that as a small, portable device that uses research-backed sensory cues to help people with Parkinson's overcome freezing of gait and walk smoothly. Sydney has a degree in biomedical engineering from Cal Poly, where she was awarded the 2019 Outstanding Women in Engineering Award. She has an academic research background in computational neuroscience with a recent research paper published in the Journal of Clinical Neurophysiology. Additionally, the Pacific Coast Business Times recognized Sydney in their 2020 Who's Who in Healthcare, Insurance, and Life Science lineup. And with Sydney today is Maria Allen. Maria has over 37 years as physical therapist. She started in kindergarten,
No, it's 43 now. It's 43 years now.
43 years treating people with brain injuries. So clearly my notes are outdated. I'll have to get a new bio. So she's been treating people with brain injury, stroke, neurodegenerative disease, and vestibular dysfunction. She began to focus on the Parkinson's population by first becoming LSVT Big certified in 2011, then Power Moves as a therapist and instructor certified in 2013 and 2014. She developed and currently serves as the coordinator of a multidisciplinary Parkinson's wellness program for a home health company serving the California Central Coast, which serves close to 300 people with Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders each year. She holds a certificate of advanced competency in home health from the APTA. She began assisting with Power Moves therapist certification courses in 2016 and transitioned to her current role as NeuroFit Networks faculty in 2019. Maria works closely with her local Parkinson's disease community, serving as the board advisor for the Central Coast Parkinson Association, as well as a volunteer advisor for NextStride and Deoro Devices. In January, she joined the inaugural advisory board of the California Chapter Parkinson's Foundation. She is most passionate about sharing her clinical experience through education and mentoring for physical, occupational, and speech therapists, as well as other healthcare and exercise professionals. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Eden.
That's
a
long.
I'll have to shorten up my bio. That's a lot. But the gist of it is that Sydney and I are both passionate about helping people who have movement problems and movement disorders. And we both like to teach. And I do a lot of teaching and mentoring, which is what I love to do. So I'm happy to talk to all of you today. I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to run through some slides. I think Sydney's got a little bit to talk about. We can have lots of discussion about this idea of how to stay on your feet, stay active, up and walking with this neurodegenerative disease, this Parkinson's kind of chronic illness that you're dealing with. And there's, it's such a complex disease. I'm going to share some slides with you. Let me see if I can get my slideshow to go here. And we'll talk about this topic. And there's, everyone will be able to put things into the chat to answer questions. So we'll keep moving forward on all that we go. So we already learned about us and how passionate we are about movement and movement disorders, thinking about Parkinson's disease. So when we think about the problems associated with Parkinson's disease, it helps to understand what the current knowledge is of the problems. And it is progressive, and it involves this area deep in your brain called the basal ganglia. And essentially, these dopamine-producing nerve cells die off. So you have this problem in your brain, the brain isn't healthy. These cells are dying off. When you don't have enough dopamine does so many things in your brain. And we'll talk a little bit about all the different things dopamine helps with, but it really helps regulate movement and sensation of movement and perception of movement. And by the time you get diagnosed, because we're still working towards finding a way to diagnose Parkinson's, a test or a measure, and there's some new breakthroughs happening, but it's still, people don't know they have Parkinson's disease until they've had a lot of those cells die off in their brain, 50 to 60%. So, it's been happening in your brain for a long time before you actually see those symptoms that are visible that help with the diagnosis. So sometimes it takes a long time to get diagnosed. Then some terms to think about as we talk about how all this affects your movement and your walking. Alpha-synuclein is this protein that's found throughout our body, everywhere. We have it in our gut, we have it in our skin, we have it all over the place. So there's some new things coming with finding this alpha-synuclein that tends to misfold and clump up and cause problems in the cells that don't get cleaned out, that lead to the death of the dopamine producing neurons. So it kind of goes back to this problem with this alpha synuclein. And the area that's most affected is the basal ganglia pathways. And the basal ganglia pathways are responsible for many different things. We see the sensory motor problems with automatic movements are what tends to be affected, the everyday automatic stuff. So that's that sensory motor pathway. But the basal ganglia also contribute to our cognitive pathway, our executive function, our thinking, our planning, our ability to respond to changes in the environment or rules or do two things at one time. And it's also got this third loop that deals with motivation and reward. And that's one of our areas that's super hard to think about because when we have Parkinson's, our brain's saying, don't move slow, move small, and then not move at all because we have a hard time with having that motivation or working for the reward. So it affects all different parts. And so those dopamines, you know, cells that are dying, we think about a lot of different ways we could possibly let me see if I can get this to make smaller here. I don't know what you're seeing, but the mechanisms, you know, there's lots of different things. So when we think about staying on your feet, slowing down this disease, the progression of these symptoms, we think about all the ways we can affect the problems that are happening in the brain that are contributing to this problem. So we know that there's not enough nutrition. So think about our brain. It needs to have good nourishment, and exercise helps improve things, the kind of the Gatorade in our brain, the neurotrophic factors. It helps with your energy level, with your mitochondria, with the energy that's part of the fatigue and problems with Parkinson's. It helps with, you know, what's going on in that brain that's causing damage and stress, and the garbage disposal mechanism that happens at night when we sleep that cleans out the bad things that are collecting in our brains. We know all of those things are affected by our Parkinson's that are leading to this death of these dopamine cells. And we know that exercise and activity and sometimes nutrition, sleep, medication, all kinds of things help our brain be healthier and stay healthy longer. Hopefully there'll be some better medications and maybe a vaccine as we move down this road of trying to figure it out. But there's a lot of things you have the ability to help with to help yourself stay active over time. So this slide I like to show just because it kind of puts it into perspective. We have this whole before you even have motor symptoms, you have this whole chunk of time where if we could stay active and be active, so we should all be thinking about being more active as we age. And there's something about that increased activity and physical activity in our midlife, so 50s and 60s, that tends to be preventative for slowing the onset of Parkinson's disease. So we should all be, whether we have Parkinson's, whether we have Parkinsonisms, or whether we are a care partner, we should all be being more active. So that's an important period of time where we can actually are looking towards protecting our brains, keeping them healthy before those motor symptoms appear. Some people, it takes a couple of years to get diagnosed. So we really need to be using activity and exercise earlier as soon as we can. And in the old days, you didn't see a therapist until, you know, you started having problems. Well, we've changed that thought that we want to get people into therapy early on. We know exercise will help that dopaminergic system, so help that all those pathways work better. It helps with our cardiovascular system. It prevents constant complications like osteoporosis. It helps with memory and cognition, thinking. So if you exercise, you learn better, you retain learning better, you remember things better. It helps with depression. It's the only thing that helps with fatigue, really, is exercise. It helps you sleep better. It helps your drugs work better. It helps reduce constipation. So we know there's lots of general things about exercise. So you're probably thinking, I'm going to be talking a lot about exercise, right? The symptoms that you see that are motor, that are the reason you get a diagnosis, are bradykinesia, rigidity, tremor, and then there's the sensory integration problems, incoordination, and postural instability. So when we think about bradykinesia, everybody with a diagnosis of Parkinson's has to exhibit to the doctor they have bradykinesia. That's when they ask you to do these fast movements, right? So your speed and amplitude is affected by this bradykinesia. So your bigger movements tend to be slow, but your smaller movements tend to be fast. And that affects things like getting up out of a chair, rolling over in bed, putting your clothes on, walking, turning, all of those everyday things are affected. But then you can have rigidity. So tends to be those flexors. Think about that posture. Everybody tends to get a little um, rounded in their posture and get a little flexed because the flexors get tight and the extensors tend to get weak, and you tend to get this stiffness that makes movement hard. That's part of what leads to fatigue, right? You lose the fluidity of movement. Your movements get chunky and stiff, and so that leads to pain. So that's another symptom that we need to address and address early. Tremor, not everybody has tremor, but about 70% do. So it's a visible symptom that people see. People have a lot of if it's kind of a stigma thing, people don't like to have that tremor be evident for people to see, but it usually doesn't affect walking unless you have a lot of tremors in your legs. The integration of your sensation and knowing how to move, the sequence of moving, the timing, the coordination of your movement patterns, all of those things are going to affect walking and getting up out of the chair to start walking. All of those things are really important. It's the simple movement sequences that are a problem. People with Parkinson's usually don't start falling. That's what postural instability is, a balance problem. Usually in the first few years, your balance is pretty good, but as you have more problems with bradykinesia, your balance reactions start to slow down. You don't catch your balance as well. You get into that kind of narrow base, you start having more problems with balance and falling. But again, those are all things that if we can stay active, we're going to help. So we've talked about this, right? And Sydney's going to talk a little bit more directly about freezing of gait, because that increases falls. It adds a lot of stigma. People aren't able to get out into the community or perform their everyday activities safely. So that's a big part of limiting people's ability to stay out on their feet in the community, particularly, and even stay safe at home. So with that stiffness and rigidity, pain, some people have dystonia where they have kind of a cramping in their foot or their neck. That causes a lot of foot and ankle problems that create problems walking. That loss of vigorous steps is what happens first. So even when you're newly diagnosed, your people aren't taking they're not taking as many steps or as many vigorous steps. That overall activity level, fitness level is affected by these motor symptoms. So you stop participating in the things you love to do, and that's affecting your quality of life. So, well, I've already said exercise. So exercise is important, and we'll talk more about the types of exercise. I highly recommend when you have these motor symptoms that you get into therapy. You should see a therapist at diagnosis or even before you're diagnosed, so they can help get you started on the right path to the right kind of exercise to deal with how you deal with some of those motor problems. The old way of not seeing a therapist till you're starting to have falls or problems is not helpful. You want to, get started in therapy at diagnosis and then get into a regular exercise program. We can modify the environment to help with some of these issues and problems. If you're having a lot of trouble with freezing of gait, sometimes it's those small spaces, those thresholds, those doorways. So there's lots of ways to open up space, put targets or cues that will help with that. We can add assistive devices. I'm a big fan of using hiking poles or Nordic walking poles. if you need a walker and it helps you be moving safely with good amplitude, then you need to agree to use one in those situations where it helps you stay active and stay moving. The other thing we know about Parkinson's is the less you move, the faster your symptoms progress, the faster the disease tends to progress. So not moving is creating more problems with your Parkinson's disease. You need to talk to your doctor. You need to talk about optimizing your medication. If you have a lot of trouble with on and off times, then really think about exercising and moving more when you're at that good time with your medication, when you're on with your medication. We all need to reduce stress because when our brains are stressed, they don't work well. We already know that brain has problems with all of those things in that brain with the garbage disposal and the mitochondria, and it needs to have an optimal environment to work well. So stress is not good. Sleep is super important. That's when the brain cleans out those garbage disposal. So if making sure that we have the right amount of medication, we've been active during the day so we can sleep well at night. Social connections. People that don't have good social connections, their brains weigh less. So there's something about even what we're doing here, connecting with others in an online forum and getting out into our community is so important to help manage those motor symptoms, help our brains work better. We know that if we're talking about exercise, aerobics is one component, and skill training where you're working on balance and learning new things, really challenging that brain, working on your functional activities like getting up and down off the floor, getting in and out of a chair, getting in and out of bed, doing things that are challenging that help challenge all the different systems in that basal ganglia. We need to work harder than our brain is telling us to. We have to work harder than we think we can. There's lots of research on treadmill, stationary cycling, tandem cycles. There's a Parkinson study out of the Netherlands that's exergaming on stationary bicycles that had great results and actually showing some good changes in the brain, strengthening. So weight training, using weights, something about that is, helps with the force production, helps things work better. The new thing is high intensity interval training. That's what I do for exercise. I go to a class where I'm doing treadmill and rowing and weight floor stuff, and I'm being pushed and helped by a coach. So someone's pushing all of us to work a little harder, go at our own pace, modify if we need to, but there's someone there kind of giving us that positive feedback. That's really important. And there's lots of good research on dance, especially tango, but all kinds of dance is good. This slide's just talking about the fact that exercise is the only line that green line under exercise starts early symptoms, even before diagnosis. So exercise should be across the whole span of managing this disease. PT and OT and speech start pretty early. Medications start pretty early and change throughout the course of the disease, but exercise goes throughout the whole thing. I have a couple of research slides just to give you an idea of why I'm so promoting exercise as a way to stay active and stay on your feet. This is a study where a man, Dr. Alberts, with an MRI machine, a functional MRI machine, had people come in and do a force production test. So they had a little force transducer that they had to squeeze and let go to copy a pattern. And they watched what was happening in their brain while they did this. So they're using their arm, their hand, their vision a little bit. And that first slide on the far right shows that they're using their basal ganglia and a little bit of their visual cortex, and they're doing the task. So then he had them come back the next day off of their medication. And most people take medication to put more dopamine in their system, their dopamine replacements. So that's why that dopamine system is lit up in that first one. But without the medication, they don't have as much dopamine in their system. And so that basal ganglia system doesn't work, and they have to work harder using their motor cortex. That's the outside parts where it's lit up out there. So they still did the task, but they had to work and use their brain differently. Then he had them come back off medication. So they still don't have that dopamine replacement medication, but he had him pedal on a tandem bicycle with someone pushing them to go fast and much faster than they would normally go for about 45 minutes. And he did the same task with them. And their brain on just exercise, no medication, is lit up in lots of different areas. The basal ganglia areas look like the one with medication. So that's an idea that exercise really improves the function in that basal ganglia, as well as similar to taking that medication. So that's part of why exercise is so important. The other thing to think about, I love this, they keep asking this question in the Parkinson's Foundation Centers of Excellence. Do you exercise at least 2.5 hours a week? So that's kind of that recommendation, 150 minutes, 2.5 hours a week. Not what kind of exercise, but are you an exerciser? And the people that said yes, yes, yes at baseline 1 year, 2 years later, their quality of life measured by this measure didn't change very much. They had a good quality of life because they were exercisers who kept exercising. The people who were knowers, who didn't want to exercise, nobody could talk them into exercising a year later, and 2 years later, their quality of life is significantly worse. So they've got a lot more problems with those motor symptoms. So it's indirect evidence that exercise is somehow slowing the progression of the disease, that somehow something about exercise is keeping those symptoms at bay so that people can be active and continue to exercise. The people that started exercising a year in, somewhere in that first year, did great. And even the people that took a couple of years to start kind of getting into an exercise habit, they were still much better off than the people who didn't develop that habit at all. So it's super important to think about, it's never too late to start. So no matter where you're at, if we can start thinking about some kind of exercise that you want to do, that you like to do, then that's what you need to start doing. And you may need to see a therapist to help you get started, to help you find the right kind of exercise. It's not enough to just say, do whatever you like. Your brain needs some help. So in therapy, there's some great research that shows that people that did a month of therapy, physical, occupational, and speech therapy, got better after 4 weeks. They got significantly better. And at the end of the year, they're back to baseline, which means they didn't have any progression of their motor symptoms. They were still doing really well. The people in the green are the control group who a year later are not, they've had a progression of their symptoms. They're not, they're stiffer, they're slower, they're not moving as well, and they're having to take more medication. So a month of therapy in that year, and then when he had them come back at the end of that year, they got better again, right? So that colorful one is the second time they did 4 weeks of therapy. So thinking about return bouts of therapy, having therapy on a regular basis. The Parkinson's Foundation has worked hard lately to do some quantification of how much exercise, what kind of exercise. They've started accrediting some exercise programs. The Power Moves program is one. Some of the Rock Steady boxing things are another. So you need to think about aerobic activity, strength training. So balance, agility, multitasking, that's that skilled where you're learning new things and you're working on those problems. And then stretching. Remember that stiffness and rigidity is one of those things that keeps you from being able to walk. So 3 days a week for at least 30 minutes, 2 to 3 days a week of stretching, 2 to 3 days a week of skilled training. So what does that mean? It means you probably should be exercising a little bit every day. It doesn't have to be the same thing every day. In fact, it should be different. We get bored and we don't learn as well when we do the same things. So they also recommend see a physical therapist, especially one who specializes in Parkinson's, because remember all those motor symptoms? You have to have somebody who understands all those motor symptoms. Make sure you're exercising at the right time of day, ideally when your medications are working well. You need to progress. You need help knowing how to modify, progress, deal with issues as they come up, and continue to participate in moderate to high intensity exercise on a regular basis. So 150 minutes is sort of that standard thing. When we look at seeing a therapist, even the therapists are being told we need to see people with Parkinson's across the disease. So early stage, at the very beginning, we should be seeing people at least, 1 to 4 visits every 6 to 12 months. So you should be seeing your therapist kind of like you see your dentist. You go to the dentist for preventative cleaning. You need to see your therapist, whether it's PT, OT, speech. When symptoms start becoming more bothersome, you may need to see therapist for more. You may need to see a therapist for, a month of therapy, like that research showed, that whole month of therapy. And then even as we go along, as we get later stage Parkinson's disease, I think that's when you need to see your therapist the most, because all of those Parkinson symptoms become more and more problematic. You need to work with the whole team of therapists to help you with all that. So think about that and then try to find those therapists that help. Cognition, when we talk about cognition, I think people with Parkinson's kind of get the idea, and some therapists only think it's dual task, doing 2 things at one time, like walking and talking, but it's a lot more than that. It's being able to stay focused with your attention or divide your attention between 2 things. It's that working memory of simple tasks, remembering the sequence of leaning forward before you get up out of the chair. How do you how do you roll over? How do you do something in the kitchen? So that's that working memory. Set switching is what we do all day long when something changes in the environment, or we change directions, we have to respond to an obstacle in our path or the threshold in the door. So all of those things are when the rules change, our brain has to adjust to that, both with thinking and sometimes our motor response. And that's a big part of the cognitive symptoms in Parkinson's. Sometimes we prioritize the wrong things. We have problems with response inhibition or response selection. So we prioritize catching something before it falls over our balance, right? We prioritize getting somewhere fast over our balance. So sometimes you need help with figuring out how to prioritize safety, right? That safety is a big problem. And as those symptoms progress, sometimes that means we need more help from our care partners. We need to use that assisted device. We have to modify our environment. We have to use some of these cueing devices and things that help us stay safe, to stay on our feet. So those things are really important. And that's part of why having an exercise professional or a therapist that understands the whole picture of Parkinson's is really important. All of these non-motor symptoms, there's kind of a non-motor symptom revolution right now. The movement disorder doctors are starting to understand how important all of these other symptoms are, because they actually create more disability and more problems with being able to be active and staying out on your feet than sometimes the motor symptoms. You can, fix those a lot easier, because all of a sudden when we start dealing with anxiety or problems with our bladder and urination and pain and constipation and depression and fatigue, and some people get involuntary movements, that's dyskinesia, where you have to take enough dopamine to move well, but sometimes it makes you move too much, right? Muscle spasms, restless legs syndrome is a big problem in Parkinson's. All of those things, when your speech and your swallowing are involved, you just start wanting to stay home or stop moving. It's really hard sometimes to work through all of these problems. How does it affect your ability to walk and stay active? All those executive function problems are part of freezing and gait. Sydney will talk more about that. The safety issues, right? All of a sudden, it's like when falls start happening, what do people say? Oh, don't get up, don't move. And sometimes if you live in an assisted living facility or a retirement community, they don't want you to move because they're afraid you're going to fall. And they prioritize that over letting you be active. So you have to work with a therapist or someone to figure out, how can I keep moving safely? Autonomic dysfunction. I don't know how many of you have problems with your blood pressure or your blood pressure dropping when you stand up. Um, Issues there create lots of problems with getting up and walking. And it's a really tough one for the doctors to figure out, because it's it's one of those non-motor symptoms that limits mobility. When you don't sleep, when you're up and down all night, that's not just you, it's whoever you live with, whoever's helping you in the middle of the night. When you don't sleep, your brain doesn't function well. and it causes a lot of that daytime sleepiness. So all these things add to becoming less active. Anxiety, fear of falling, all of that means we call it in therapy, we call it fear avoidance behavior. You start being afraid to do things because you're afraid you're going to fall, or you're afraid you're going to um, have a bladder issue if you start being active, or you're going to have issues with your blood pressure and pass out, right? Then that creates fall risk. So all of these things are really challenging. So what do you need? It leads to stigma. You're afraid to go out. You're afraid you're going to fall. More anxiety. And anxiety is one of the hardest problems to deal with. Motivation, initiation. One of the symptoms of Parkinson's is apathy. It's just that sense of not wanting to do anything. So all of these things are going to affect how you walk. How do you manage them? You need a huge team. You need to work, stay healthy, stay well. You've got a primary care provider. You might need to see a specialist. I didn't put the movement disorder specialist on here, but ideally, I'm hoping you're seeing a neurologist, and preferably a movement disorder neurologist who really understands all this. Maybe you see a dietitian, maybe a pelvic floor specialist, a gastroenterologist to help with your other issues, maybe the cardiologist. I mean, you need a big team of people. You need to think about having speech therapy earlier on. It's not just for if your voice, that soft voice, is one of those symptoms of Parkinson's that are related to basically bradykinesia and reduced self-awareness. So they do help you with your voice, but they also work with cognition. So they can help you with some of those things about you're making the right decisions, focused attention, executive function, some of those issues. That's what speech therapy can work with you on. And later on, they can help with um, other things as well as voice. So social workers, they're wonderful, right? They are a wealth of knowledge. Psychologists, psychiatrists, there are life coaches out there who can help you. I work in palliative care a lot, and we have wonderful non-denominational spiritual counselors that help kind of with all of these different problems. And we know that exercise helps with depression. Exercise helps with constipation. Exercise helps with sleep. Exercise helps your cognitive functions work better. So we've got to keep you moving. We've got to find ways to help you exercise. Sleep, healthy diet, lots of breath work, meditation, yoga, using that mind-body focus. Medications are important too. It's just, they don't always work as well. Actually, exercise, does a lot. But build those social networks, build your team, and it should be a really big team. So when we think about you, that person with Parkinson's in the middle, on that side, you need a neurologist, and ideally a movement disorder neurologist who's a Parkinson specialist. Oh, a nurse is fabulous. Nurses help with all of those non-motor symptoms. So, having access to nurses, or having nurses who really understand Parkinson's, we need to have more of them. Having a Parkinson's specialized therapist in PT, OT, speech therapy. Again, you can see any therapist. It's sort of like seeing a regular physician or neurologist, but if you want, it's ideal to see a specialist if you can, that has special training. Social workers, dietitians, psychologists, psychiatrists, they're kind of on that traditional healthcare side, but there's lots of stuff on the wellness side, and more exercise professionals that have training in Parkinson's, nutritionists, art and music therapy, life coaches. All of those things are going to help you manage all of those symptoms to stay on your feet. What are some of the barriers? Having access to these specialists, finding these specialists. So in my area where we live, we have 2 movement disorder neurologists in all of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. So not every person with Parkinson's can see that movement disorder neurologist. They can't see them all. So they see the general neurologist, and there needs to be more education for those general neurologists about people with Parkinson's. Finding those Parkinson's specialized therapists who have training, LSVT Big, Power Moves. The Parkinson's Foundation is doing educational things for the healthcare professionals. Speech therapists do Speak Out or LSVT Loud. Hopefully you've run across some of these therapists. You can find them online. Exercise professionals as well that have training to work with people with Parkinson's is ideal. Again, all movement is going to be good, but to move well, to address all those symptoms, to stay safe, you need somebody that understands all those symptoms. Mental health, I think, and care partner support is really hard to come by in our healthcare system, but search it out and find it, and don't be afraid to ask for help with that. We know insurance limitations, copays, lack of funding for wellness, and fitness programs, but they're out there. I know of a couple of therapists, a therapist and an exercise professional, who provide free exercise classes, and they do them on Zoom. It's kind of a pay it forward thing. So there's that. Or you can prioritize a little bit of fitness and spend $100 a month on a really high quality program. So think about all of the things that go into that. Transportation is another barrier. And I don't have a great answer for you other than, finding the resources in your area. My daughter lives in Germany, so they walk everywhere. There's public transportation everywhere. People ride bikes everywhere. And we just don't have, in most of our areas, we don't have access to that. But search those out, and hopefully that will get better. They're just trying to build more walk friendly areas in our area. Find your local support groups, right? They're the people who can help you find the local things that you need to find. Search for those low cost programs, scholarships, prioritize that exercise and fitness. Prevention's always less expensive than the other. And then find a buddy. Find somebody outside of your care partner, your wife, your husband, your person who's there all the time. Find somebody else that can help you get out to take a walk with, exercise with on a regular basis. It's really important. We've got to find ways to move. What else can you do? So I love Dr. Lori Mishley. She's gathering all this data, talking about all the lifestyle changes you can make to stay in that green area longer. As years since diagnosis, you want to have a good or excellent quality of life. You want to be below the average, right? You want to have a great quality of life, even 10, 15, 20 years out, instead of having, your quality of life or your motor symptoms and non-motor symptoms progress quickly. What are these people doing that are in the good and excellent thing? They have a lot of friends. They eat organic. They cook their own meals with lots of fresh vegetables, nuts and seeds and fruit. And, they exercise at least 3 days a week, all the way up to 7. Every day you exercise, some form of 30 minutes of exercise is going to help you keep your quality of life well. So we stay away from fried foods. We stay away from, lots of those kind of negative things, and try to be as positive as we can. And that helps us stay active, stay on our feet. So as we said, from my perspective, the ways we stay on our feet, we follow these kinds of exercise recommendations. We do some aerobic activity. It doesn't have to be equipment. So this lady's on a treadmill. There's stationary bicycles. There's recumbent bicycles. There's steppers. You can even just get your heart rate up walking in your community, walking up and down your hallway, doing sit to stand, doing big whole body movements can get your heart rate up. That's what aerobic activity is. Strength training. It can be strength training with weights, with bands, with your body weight. I love it when people can still get up and down off the floor, just doing sitting, from sitting to standing. That's functional strength training for your legs. So we need to do strength training. We need to work on balance, agility, doing more challenging the rules, changing things up. Things should change. There was one study where they had people do just the treadmill, and they didn't change anything up for them, and they kind of did the treadmill for 45 minutes for 10 sessions in a row. And some people actually got worse with their Parkinson's symptoms. People that had coaching and pacing and maybe some exergaming, all of those people where they're engaged, they're doing more than one thing at a time, they had improvements in their symptoms. And then we need to look at our mind body stuff, yoga, tai chi, stretching, working on that rigidity, that symptom of rigidity, so that we can move more easily, more fluidly, without being so hampered by that. So all of those things, at least 3 days a week, all super important. Find a therapist, find an exercise professional. it's so important that you stay active. Make sure you use those recommendations and follow through with anything to keep yourself safe to prevent those falls. But we got to stay on your feet and stay active. And I think that was all I had for my crazy run through all those symptoms.
Okay, thanks, Maria. So I'll go ahead and take it from here. Maria had a great overview of kind of Parkinson's symptoms in general and all the things that we can do to kind of take away the barriers to staying active and the importance of exercise. So what I'm going to do then, I'm going to do a quick overview of a specific symptom of Parkinson's that might be preventing you from getting exercise and getting out and moving a little bit more, called freezing of gait. And I'm going to talk you through one of the solutions that's available that I created with my biomedical engineering degree. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to keep this short, and then we're going to go straight into Q&A. Okay, so freezing of gait. What is it? What can we do about it? So some of you might have heard of the symptom before. You might have experienced the symptom before. Essentially, what freezing of gait is the sudden onset of immobility is the way that it's described medically. What you'll see is maybe some small, really small shuffling steps. You'll see kind of legs trembling. You'll try and take a step, but your foot doesn't quite move or doesn't quite go where you want it to. This can be extremely frustrating. It can also be a major cause of falls for people with Parkinson's disease. So it's a really important symptom to look at. This is a video of someone who's experiencing freezing of gait. So this is Jack. This is the person that I made this device for originally. So he is trying to take a step, right? You can see his legs are trembling. He's trying to pick up his foot. No matter how hard he tries, he can't take that step. So this is what freezing of gait looks like. This can last for a couple of seconds. It can last for a couple of minutes. So there's quite a huge variety in the way that people experience this. Some common triggers for freezing of gait. There are both environmental triggers and there are kind of internal triggers. So some environmental triggers would be like walking into a doorway, walking into an elevator, walking into a small space. All of those are kind of environmental triggers that you might have noticed if you're, walking into the bathroom and all of a sudden you kind of stop for a second and then you're able to keep going. That might be freezing of gait for you. There's also internal triggers. So a lot of it can be anxiety. So I have, somebody that I work with that says every time he's crossing the street, if somebody tells him to hurry up, he immediately freezes. It's that kind of fear of, oh man, I have to get across the street or the cars are going to start going. And that can even bring on freezing of gait. So what I found, the reason that freezing of gait happens is, as Maria was saying, right, there's a specific part of the brain that's getting damaged or disconnected when you have Parkinson's. Because of that, that signal that your brain is sending to initiate movement, right, to take that step, sometimes that doesn't get to the muscles in your legs to tell your foot to take a step, to initiate that step. And so what I found when I was doing research in this space was I found that we can actually use these other cues, these external cues like visual and auditory cues, to activate the goal-oriented part of the brain. And that allows you to kind of bypass the damaged part of the brain that's causing freezing of gait and allows you to be able to start walking. So instead of using the automatic part of the brain, you're using the goal-oriented part of the brain. Just by changing the intention behind the movement, you change the part of the brain that's being used to initiate that movement, and you're able to start walking. Now, what's really interesting is that this general idea is really well known to be effective, right? It's been used in physical therapy clinics for years. There are over 100 peer-reviewed articles that have been published showing the efficacy. But what was missing for Jack was a way to take those cues outside of the physical therapy clinic and be able to use them at home, to go to the bathroom by himself, to go on a walk with his wife, Sandy, to be able to live his life the way that he wanted to. So all I did was take the most effective visual and auditory cues from research, combine them into a simple portable device that can attach onto any cane, walker, or walking pole. So the visual cue that we use is a green laser line projected onto the floor in front of you. The auditory cue is a metronome. So you visualize yourself stepping over that green laser line or stepping to the beat of the metronome. That change of intention changes the part of the brain that's being activated and allows someone to be able to restore mobility. Some other visual cues that you might have used already in a physical therapy office is like a lot of physical therapists and occupational therapists will put down like parallel lines of tape on the ground and ask you to step over those lines of tape. Sometimes people will put down like colorful circles on the ground and ask you to step over those. Maybe a rope ladder on the ground, stepping through the rope ladder. Marching music, those are all examples of visual and auditory cues that you might already be familiar with. So here is a video of Jack using our device for the first time. So we put this device on his walker and he was able to get over that freezing episode. Here's another video of someone who's actually experiencing freezing. So he's unable to move his legs, and then he activates that green laser line from the next stride, and that allows him to take those first steps. As I mentioned, there's a ton of research behind this, most notably in the Parkinson's disease space. These visual and auditory cues have been shown to reduce falls by 40% for people with Parkinson's. They've been shown to reduce the number of freezing episodes that come on by 43%, and they've been shown to reduce the duration of freezing episodes by 69%. So once you're already freezing, you can get out of those freezing episodes faster. They're also shown to be effective outside of Parkinson's, but we'll focus on Parkinson's for now. There's also kind of these other metrics that I think are important to look at outside of the clinical data. So these are kind of surveys of people that have used NextRide for over a month. People report increased confidence. 93% of people who use NextRide for over a month report an increased confidence while walking. 86% of people report increased general mobility, and 75% of people report a decreased fear of falling. Now, these numbers are really important to us because it's not just about, okay, the clinical outcomes, it's also about the confidence that you feel to be able to get up and move around, feel like you have a tool to help you when you need it. So that's kind of a rough overview of NextStride. Something that's important to note here, here, I'll just kind of show you a quick picture of the device on a walker, on a cane, on walking poles. Here's Maria working with one of our customers, Earl, with the walking poles that she was talking about. She recommends walking poles for people. Here's a picture of one of our other users, Walter, who's using it with his walking poles. Just to give you an idea of the versatility of the product. And then the last video that I'll show you, or last slide that I'll show you, is just if you do think that this is a good fit for you, we have the price information, all of that is available. It's $4.99, but we do have $100 off for the PMDA to offer discount for people. It also is covered by the Parkinson's Wellness Fund. So if anybody needs financial assistance, they can get coverage through that organization. And it's 100% covered by veterans by the VA. Now, something that's really, if you have any questions about how to get this, please let me know. Something that's really important for me to note here is that NextRide is one option, right? I'm sharing this information with you because this is something that I created that I think is helpful for people, but there are other options out there. There's the U-Step walker is a great option for people. There's a company called Walk with Path, the Pathfinder. I don't know if they're available in the US yet, but they have options for people as well. But there are sometimes medication will help with freezing of gait, sometimes it won't. There's kind of different groups of people. There's people where they have off-related freezing of gait, so only when they're not on their medication do they experience freezing. There actually are people that will experience more freezing when they're on their medication, but sometimes medication does help. That's off-related and on-related freezing. And then there's freezing that's independent of medication. But there's also physical therapy, going to see a physical therapist, going to see an occupational therapist. There are exercises that you can do to help. There's internal cueing outside of external cueing. So the same concept of, okay, I'm going to use this goal to change the part of the brain that's being activated. You can do that internally. So your physical therapist can help you come up with internal cues. For example, there's a doorway 5 steps away. It's going to take me 5 steps to get there, kind of counting your steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, that just activates the goal-oriented part of the brain.
Predicting
So I
those
want
steps
to,
is even better, right? Predicting those steps. So planning, getting that brain to plan ahead. Lots and lots of tools.
there you go. There you go. So yeah, Maria has lots of tools also as the experienced physical therapist here. Um, so I'll leave it there. I wanted to make sure, I'll stop sharing my screen. I have plenty of videos. I wanted to make sure that I got some information out to you about this one product that is available to you, but want to make sure that you know that there are other options out there as well. And we can open it up to Q&A. Thank you everybody for listening.
There was one question, but Maria did answer it about massage. So if anybody has questions, somebody asked, will massage be helpful for rigidity? Maria explained it helps, but the benefits are short term. You need to actively move and stretch, taking advantage of the massage benefits. If people would like to add other questions in the chat, one of my questions though, because the thing about the freezing is that it leads to anxiety
Well,
because
anxiety also causes freezing. So it's a vicious cycle, right? So, that anxiety, like 70% of people with Parkinson's suffer with anxiety. They have trouble with anxiety. And so anxiety makes the freezing worse, but then the freezing creates anxiety and fear of going anywhere, right? Inactivities. So it's a cycle, right?
that to me is just really important as far as like trying to break it because like so I mean when Sydney had said like it leads to more confidence, I was like, okay, does that maybe decrease anxiety? Because usually most of us are anxious about things that we can admit are irrational. Like I always joke, if a spider dropped down, I would shriek, even though the spider's not really going to hurt me, but I wouldn't be happy about it. Whereas a lot of the Parkinson's anxiety is really tough because it is a founded fear that I could just be walking and I just stop. And so it's harder to then overcome because it's a
So
realistic feel.
me, that's the beauty, one of the great things about the Next Stride, because it's a small little portable device that you can control easily. You can turn it on. You can use it when you need to. You can use the laser light or the metronome. You can choose. So it gives you some control over, we talk about, we want to prevent freezing from happening, right? That's ideally. In therapy, we work on that a lot. Wide base of support, weight shifting, not stopping with your feet together. There's lots of strategies, but to have something that you can turn on and know that it's going to help you get out of a freeze. So recover from that freeze and start moving again. It builds that confidence. It allows you to go out and stay active. So it breaks that cycle. Even if you don't use it all the time, or even if you don't look at the light, like you can look at that light for the first step, but then just knowing it's there and visualizing that in your brain. So that's thinking about how athletes use these external cues all the time. They use that visualization all the time. So we want to work with those cues and that confidence, those numbers on, people that use the Next Stride, that have that ability to know that it's there, whether it's, kind of inobtrusively on their cane or on their walker, but they know they can turn it on to help them when they get into a crowded space. Freezing's worse in a crowded space. Freezing's worse when you're, trying to navigate narrow spaces. So just that control and that ability to use that is so important.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's important to note also is like the internal cueing. I think that it's a great option for a lot of people. I also see there are people that when they freeze, they panic and they don't remember what their physical therapist told them to do 3 weeks ago, and having a solution that they know they can rely on is really important with that anxiety.
Oh, I see some questions.
We did have a
Yeah,
question though also about the opposite of freezing, which is the festination, where you almost can't stop moving. You're going too fast.
Right. So that's bradykinesia in a different way. Instead of big and slow, it's like those fast movements become smaller and smaller, and combined sort of with that tendency to have that flexed posture, we call it hastening. You're just almost running. Like people sometimes lose their balance forward, and it is a huge fall risk. So again, seeing a therapist to help you figure out what are the things that are contributing to that. If you have better posture, you work on those extensors, you get your vision upright, you use, your eyes to plan to go to the next target. Like Sydney said, you can say, okay, I'm going to get from here to the doorway. I think it's going to be about 6 steps. Usually that works really well, but it's that posture is a big part of that hastening. Sometimes we have to slow down and use a metronome or music or something that helps us take bigger, slower steps, because fast and small is just another Parkinson's symptom of it's related to that bradykinesia, those postural changes, the rigidity, the lack of axial mobility. So you have to look at the problem and then try to break it down and fix those things as we can, whether it's helping you with your range of motion so that you can stand straighter. Your eyes are affected in Parkinson's. We've got to use our eyes more. That helps drive movement. There's so many things that, therapy can help you with, exercise can help you with, devices like the Next Stride can help you with. So search all of those things out.
There are a few questions in the chat that Sydney has answered in the chat, so I just want to make sure if people aren't following the chat. Someone asked, if I don't use a walker or cane, can I wear it on my wrist? And Sydney explained, not yet, but we're working on a belt attached thing.
Version of the unit. Yep. And so if anybody wants to get on the wait list for that unit, it should be out next year at some point. So you can just send an email. I put our email and our phone number in the chat as well. And if you just send an email saying you want to get on that list, then we'll let you know when it's available.
Yeah, and Medicare funding's been hard to come by. Medicare is picky. The VA funding is great. The Parkinson's Fund does, help with that, but Medicare so far we haven't been able to get them to fund it. But I'm excited about the belt one, because a lot of times adding an assistive device with freezers, it actually is another cognitive thing to think about, and it makes freezing worse to have to sequence a cane or the walker. Typically, if people let it get out ahead of them, it makes them lean forward more, and they get either festinate or freeze because of their posture with the walker. So lots and lots and lots of things to take into consideration to try to help prevent those freezing and falling and staying up on your feet active.
And I know we're right at the top of the hour here, but I just wanted to double down on, if anybody has any questions about any of this, my email, my phone number's in the chat. If you have any questions about Next Stride or other options for freezing of gait, I'm happy to help answer questions individually.
Good. Somebody's got the device and they love it. Sydney, that's great.
Nice.
One thing, because we did put several links in the chat. If you want to save your chat, if you look at the bottom of your chat, you'll see 3 little dots. If you click on them, you can save your chat. Also, Maria and Sydney were kind enough. They're going to give us a PDF version of their slides, so that will be available with the video. We are out of time, but thank you so much for being here today. As always, we have a tradition here at PMD, our wave of gratitude. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank